What's up, everybody? It is Tuesday, May the 30th. Hey, we're almost done with May. And it is 2 p.m. here on the west coast of the United States of America. Hope you're doing well. As I can see, some folks are already in the chat, dropping those comments. Go ahead and hit that like button because it is important. And it does something metaphysically that I have no idea about, but it somehow helps us be more visible. So please do that. Hit that like button. Drop a comment. Let us know what's going on, how you're doing, how's your week going. As you can tell from the thumbnail, I have a guest with me today who's waiting in the green room, the virtual green room. And I will bring her in. She's a very good and dear friend. We're going to have a really fun conversation today. It is... It is not really an interview. It's more like a conversation we're going to have, and it's related to an e-course that we will be offering over the next couple of weeks. And I hope that you guys will benefit from it. So she's taught through this. I waited until she was done teaching through it the first go so that you guys would be able to get the refined version, as they say. It's always better when you teach something and then have to teach it again, because then you've learned about the mistakes that you've made. So, Ani, what's up? Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, you just went through this. You taught this this thing that you've created from scratch.
Yes.
Is it kind
to our guinea pigs? The guinea pigs. You're so right. It's nice to have taught through it once. So
okay. So there's a couple of things that I think people should. So you are a phenomenal baker. You bake stuff. My favorite. So you bake cakes. Cakes are really good, but I really enjoy the cookies that you bake.
Cookies.
They got a certain kind of
We
salt.
can't bring those around you.
Bring those around especially you. Now, especially right now. They have a certain kind of saltiness to them that other cookies do not have. Mm-hmm. So you kind of create that stuff from scratch as well, the baking. So you enjoy
I like
doing
creating
that.
Things from scratch. That's true.
Arthur, can you boost her volume a little bit? Yes, I can boost. Okay. So, or she's very soft spoken. So she's, okay.
Me?
So
Me?
that was yes. For those who know you, know you. Arnold said, a woman teaching theology. Man, mute your audio.
No teaching will be happening here. You can calm down.
This is a conversation. You can listen to this without melting. So yeah, you created this course from scratch, and you didn't just kind of create it in the sense of, like, hey, here's a bunch of PowerPoints, and I did a bunch of reading on this. You were quite hard about it, or for it. And then you also created a really, really cool companion guide is probably the best way to put it, a workbook that goes along. Do you have that with you?
I do.
Okay.
This is my baby.
So she's very proud of that.
I am.
And yeah, so just to say, those who take the e-course will get that as well in PDF form, and they'll be able to download it, and obviously are going to work through it as they go through the class. But it is on the temple. Now, this is weird because the temple has been destroyed. Mm. And we no longer need the temple. Mm-hmm. I was very close to titling this stream, "Why Christians Need the Temple," but I was like, that's kind of clickbaity, and I don't like clickbaity stuff. So tell us a little bit about the temple, maybe the background to the temple, and then we'll throw in some hints as to what's going to be included in the course.
Yes. So usually when we think of the temple, most of us will naturally think of, especially if you're thinking biblically, you'll think of the sacrifices, the priests, and more of that lies kind of in the Old Testament, sacrificial system's done away with. We don't have the priests anymore. We don't need them anymore. The New Testament's very clear about that. And so a lot of us will sometimes just write off the temple as it's an Old Testament thing and it doesn't really have any relevance to us today. But through the course of this study, what I hope we accomplish is showing us how vital the temple is to the Christian now. Not only is it an Old Testament thing, and every Christian ought to care very deeply about the Old Testament, but it's very relevant to even New Testament Christianity. It's not just an Old Testament thing. And so we have this building, right? We first starts off as a tabernacle, a tent
Hmm.
that they would wander around with. And then that becomes a temple that eventually gets destroyed once, then gets rebuilt into this grand, beautiful architectural building that even foreigners commented on, Herod's Temple. And then eventually that gets destroyed. But there's so much more. Like, why do we care about the temple? What is God teaching us through the temple? And there's a very, very significant message that I think the temple through the entire biblical theology is showing us. And so that's kind of what we'd be going through in this study.
Okay, so I'll give you an example. Today, in our reading, I was reading through Ecclesiastes 5. Okay, and in it, and I immediately thought about this because I knew you were coming on, and I was like, oh, I can use this actually. So Ecclesiastes 5, 1-7, it essentially talks about like making vows and then keeping your vows and stuff like that. And then there's this statement which seems so out of place. Okay, it says, I lost it. Hang on. Okay, it says in verse 6, let not your mouth lead you into sin, and do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. And you kind of go, what? And then the NIV actually translates this and says, do not say to the temple messenger, this was a mistake. And you kind of go, But verse 1 of chapter 5 starts off by saying, guard your step when you go to the house of God.
Mm-hmm.
And then it talks about when you draw near, it's better to listen than to speak because you're talking to God. And then one of the things says, do not be rash with your mouth. Do not make vows that you do not keep. Now, this is assuming this is a conversation with man and God. And so he's saying, do not make a vow to God and then not keep it. Now, in our study, we discovered, hey, in Deuteronomy, it says, when you go to the temple and you make a vow to God, make sure you do that vow or else God's going to count it to you as a sin. And what Ecclesiastes is saying is you cannot make a vow to God and then not keep it and then tell the messenger, which is probably when you're offering a sacrifice because you've sinned by not keeping your vow. You tell them it was an accidental sin. So it brings this whole thing into like the sort of offering you're giving. Instead of giving an offering of normal sin offering, you're giving an offering of the accidental sin. And he's saying you can't do that. And you're just, normal people will read verse 6 and be like, what? When you understand what Deuteronomy is talking about, and you understand what happens in the temple, and then you understand how people make vows to God in the Old Testament, you go, that makes so much more sense. It all comes together.
I think that this theme of the temple is woven through every area of scripture. Like, yeah, you'd be hard pressed, especially if you're reading the Psalms, to read a psalm and not have temple theme, to read prophets and not be like the temple is not even hidden there. They talk so much about the temple. And there's so much stress throughout, not just the Old Testament, but even you get to the New Testament, there's so much temple language that you don't even necessarily you might miss because you don't recognize the language, like certain terminology that's used for the temple is not so obvious unless you've done the study, unless you understand. Like anytime you hear mountain, right, something is happening there. And so whenever you do the study and you recognize this terminology is related to temple, and it's making a very, very specific point about not just the temple, but who God is, then it not only do you understand it more, but the depth you can understand certain things. Like you just see temple everywhere. Like I feel like when we were doing our study, one of the things I kept saying is your ears should be ringing when you hear certain words. And I think by the time we got to the end, we were reading through certain passages and like I could just see the eyes of like, I know that's temple related. That's temple language. And it's like, yeah, because
Yeah.
so there's like it's the temple, I believe, is from Genesis all the way to Revelation. It's a theme that's present throughout, and God is making a very, very important statement through it.
So the temple is where God dwells. Let's just talk temple stuff, okay? Because this is fun.
Okay, let's do it.
So the temple is where God dwells, kinda, sorta. Right? Would you agree
Yes.
with that?
Yes. I mean, I
Okay.
would say yes, that is where he dwells.
Okay. So and then what we see is later on, at the very least, say in Revelation, it says that God now dwells with humans.
God's place is with man. That's exactly what
Okay,
it says.
so he just dwells with them, which is kind of a look back to Genesis.
Hmm.
Okay, but in between garden and in between what I would call the second garden, the recreated
Hmm.
earth that looks a lot like the garden except on a global scale. I mean, you would have to be blind to miss that stuff. Like
Yes.
you really would have to, or you just don't know how to read to see that there's trees of life on the new recreated earth, and
Rivers.
rivers and stuff like that. In between, what you get is God has them create a tabernacle, and then He dwells in the tabernacle. Okay,
Hmm.
and then He has them create a temple, and then He dwells in the temple. I mean, there's this huge, really, like, talk about this thing with Solomon, where like the presence of God. I don't know if you want to just mention that, like, kind of what's happening
Glory.
in that scene.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, God never actually asks for the temple itself, right? He only asks for the tabernacle, and then out of David's heart, and he wants to give God this home, and so his son Solomon takes about 7 years to build this beautiful, massive structure, which is, I mean, a laughing stock compared to the temple that comes later. But for their time being, it was huge and compared to the tabernacle. There's gold everywhere. But then Solomon, prays this prayer and he's dedicating the temple. Everything's finally built and everything's in place. And so he gathers the people and he prays this prayer. And in the prayer, I mean, you see, first of all, a lot of their expectations for what the temple is. And so that's kind of what we do in the study too. We'll go through all of the expectations that the Israelites had of their temple.
Mm-hmm.
And then so as he's praying, right, this massive glory cloud. So this cloud, and it's very similar to exactly what happens at the dedication of the tabernacle, fills the temple, so much so that the priests, they can't see what they're doing. They can't go into the temple and continue to offer all these sacrifices, which were in the hundreds and hundreds of animals were
Mm.
sacrificed at the dedication. And it's God basically coming into his temple and making his dwelling there.
Now, this immediately makes me think about a study we did with the guys group at our church, where we in Ezekiel we see that he has this vision of God leaving the temple.
Leaving the
He
temple, he
sort of
sure
goes
does,
into
yeah.
exile with the Israelites, and
Hmm.
never. It seems like he never comes back.
He doesn't. I mean, at least biblically, from a temple structure perspective, there's something similar that happens in Acts, but it's not in a structure, right? It's in people.
Okay, so that's where I was going to lead to. Yes. When we were in Bible college, you and I, it was, I think it was a pleasure for teachers to have us in class.
I would hope so.
I think they would have said, yeah, that's these people make class really fun. I mean, if I was teaching, I definitely would have liked that.
Yeah.
So we get into the New Testament, and again, it hasn't returned. Like we've had. Sorry, let me backtrack. The temple gets destroyed, and then there's this rebuilt temple. Okay, but it's not like to its former glory.
As far as, what are you talking about? Ezra and Nehemiah's temple?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
people are weeping because they've seen the old temple, and they're
Hmm.
like, but there's this rededication service kind of that happens.
Hmm.
Um,
A
people pray and
recommitment from the
repent,
people.
recommitment, covenant renewal. For those who want to
Yes.
study covenants, there's a covenant renewal that happens there.
Hmm.
Um, and and then we get into the New Testament, right?
Hmm.
And Herod's in the midst of building this, or Herod the Great started building this temple. And by the time Jesus is on the scene, so the 30s AD, the temple's still not complete.
Hmm.
And when does it get completed? Do you remember?
Well, it becomes functional in about a year and a half. So he starts building this by like 1312 BC, and it's functional within a year and a half. Like it's being used and all the things are doing, but it takes about 60 years for it to fully be complete. Like it gets complete probably 4 or 5 years. Um,
Before it's
no, I would say
destroyed.
maybe 10 years before it gets destroyed. Yeah, it's really sad. But I mean,
That's the
it is
worst.
like even the Babylonian Talmud says that if you have not seen Herod's temple, you haven't seen beauty. So I mean, this thing was massive,
So this is one of
size wise, and
it's one of the wonders of the ancient world.
it is.
It's
Yeah.
sparkly. It's got gold in the walls. Correct. Like it's a
Yep.
magnificent. There's all sorts of replicas of the temple that have been built.
Mhm.
Correct. I'm actually
Mhm.
trying
There's
to.
one in Jerusalem too. They have the whole old city of Jerusalem, like they've made a miniature version of it. It's really cool. And you see the Temple Mount in comparison to the rest of the city. It took about it was 1/6 of the entire city of Jerusalem. So it was huge. The temple itself was big too, but it was on this mount that it was like, it took over the whole city. You could see it from anywhere. It was just people came just to marvel at Herod's temple. But it was missing a very key component. It was missing the Ark of the Covenant, which gets lost after the temple got destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians. It was never recovered. So we there's so many theories about where it is and what happened to it, but it's not in the temple, so it's missing the ark, and of course with it it's missing the glory of the Lord. There is no cloud. So like as far as architecturally, it's beautiful, but it's missing the key thing that would make it the temple.
Yeah. As I will quote one of my favorite, I guess, artists, Matisyahu. It's not about the land or the sea, but the dwelling of your majesty.
Hmm.
And he's a Jew. Okay, he gets it. He gets the fact that none of these things are sacred in and of themselves unless God's presence is there. Um, so okay, you mentioned something. Let's talk about like the interior stuff of
Hmm.
this temple. Um, the Ark of the
Which one?
Covenant.
Herod's
Well, just the
or the
temple.
temple?
Yeah, the temple.
Okay.
The Ark of the Covenant is in the temple.
Yep.
So the temple has a structure. I'm actually trying to pull up a picture of the temple. I mean,
Hmm.
uh, to show folks because
I mean, that's what, so in the study, just backtracking real quick, the
yes,
first thing that we do the first week is we go through the temple structure and the history of the temple. So from its conception as a tabernacle all the way until its destruction in 70 AD, and then even kind of after 70 AD. You know, a lot of us, we know, oh, the temple gets destroyed 70 AD, but then what happens to that area? Now it's such a hot spot, right? We politically, there's so much controversy over the area, so we talk about the history and how we got to where we are today and the structure, so we understand kind of the generic what it looks like. Then the second week, what we'll do is we go through to the ancient Near East, because temples were not just a biblical thing. It wasn't, the Israelites weren't the only ones who had temples, and they are in a cultural context. And so that second week, we look at what temples meant to other ancient Near Eastern cultures, how they functioned, what was the expectations, and so then we get to better understand Israelite expectations and what they viewed as temple and what it meant. And then the third and fourth weeks are probably my favorites, where we talk about cosmic geography and cosmic temple, Garden of Eden. So we go back to kind of the beginning and see little temple stuff sprinkled throughout,
Hmm.
and how, like, I, without giving obviously too much away, but how the temple has kind of been God's mode of operandum and being with his people from the start, and even before the tabernacle was built. And then week 5, we'll be focusing on the New Testament temple as far as Jesus and what he did. And then the last week, we will talk about the end, the final temple, the final garden, the second garden, as you called it. We'll take a look at that in the 6th week.
Okay, so I have you up on the screen, and I'm just going to be audio for now. But so I have the temple up right there. So the temple has 3. Now this is Herod's temple that we have on the screen. The temple has, you could say, 3 main kind of structure to it, right? So, and we'll start from the outer court, and then you go into what is called the holy place. And there's certain items in the holy place.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into what is called the Holy of Holies. Now, in the Holy of Holies, there's the tabernacle. Okay.
The Ark of the Covenant.
Sorry, the Ark of the Covenant. That's the tabernacle. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, what is it? Okay, now I'm asking a funny question here. Okay, it's a leading question. So I'm going to let you talk. What is the Ark of the Covenant?
Okay. So practically, first, what it looks like, it's just a cedar box. Actually, it's made of acacia. It's made out of acacia wood, and then it's overlaid with gold. So it's completely gold. It's like a rectangular box, and it has a lid. The lid is sometimes called the mercy seat, even though that's kind of a mistranslation. It's not the best translation for it. But on the lid, there is these 2 cherubim, like angels, and their wings are kind of touching. Inside is for sure the tablets that God has given to Moses, and there's some debate over whether actually Aaron's staff was in there, and also some manna that, rained down from heaven. So this is the only piece of furniture that's found in the tabernacle. Later on in the temple, Solomon adds these 2 giant golden cherubim as well, with their wings outstretched, kind of.
Whoa. We'll have Ani back right now. Hang on. Okay, so there she is. Okay, that's okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
My mother-in-law was calling me. I forgot to put my phone on airplane mode.
That's good.
Anyway.
Okay, so Solomon builds these cherubim he adds in there, and then?
Yeah, so they're kind of like guardians. And so throughout the, I came back. Sorry, panic happened. Through different parts of scripture, the Ark of the Covenant is referred to as the footstool. So the footstool, and we have this image then of God sitting on the throne, especially Solomon's imagery with the cherubim, like that's kind of what he's doing, is the cherubim's wings act as the seat where God is sitting in the throne in the Holy of Holies. And the ark is like his footstool. So he's resting his feet on the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the interesting thing about the ark is that it's very, very closely tied to the presence of God. God has chosen to basically localize himself above the ark. And so you'll see where sometimes Moses goes in to talk, and the Bible says that the voice came above the ark. And it's very interesting because it's in the ancient Near East, right? There's idols. Idols are very, very prevalent. It's like you can't have a temple without an idol.
Okay, so
there.
I want to hang on before you go on, because
Okay.
this involves not just theology now; it involves quite a bit of apologetic stuff. This is an apologetics channel.
Yes.
Often you will inform people will say things like, there's absolutely nothing different than what the Israelites are doing and what the other nations around them were doing. Okay, and that's always a mixed bag in response in regards to how we respond to that. What is similar in regards to the idolatry and the temple kind of sort of stuff. What is similar and what is so different about the temple that we get in Israel?
Okay, there's a few things. So we'll start with the ark. Because and this is kind of a point I would always stress in the class, is that there's lots of similarities. This is why we have the Ancient Near Eastern Week, because it's so important to see the similarities, because there will be this one area of disconnect, and that disconnect is making such profound statements about who God is, the God of Israel. So with Ancient Near Eastern iconography, right? Idols and imagery and all that stuff, they were always anthropomorphic. So they either look like humans or they looked like animals, always. So they had that kind of a resemblance. They also went through this ritual. So then in their worldview, even the creation of the idol was led by God. Okay, so the deity would decide this is the kind of image, and that would come about through dreams and incantations and all of that stuff. And then the people would mold, and after they molded and had their idol, that idol had to go through like a mouth washing ceremony ritual, basically to take the human element out. And so they would see idols not as just this like image, like, oh, it's kind of a
Like
symbol.
A statue.
Yeah, it wasn't a statue. They would then believe that after that ceremony, the Ba, which is a very Egyptian term of like the god's being, would come into the idol. So then the idol would be present both here on earth and in the heavens above. And so the idol then would also be taken into war. They would bow down before it, right? They would make vows before it. And so we see some very similar stuff happening with the Ark of the Covenant when they decide the Ark of the Covenant would go to war with them. It would go ahead of them. And so we see a very interesting thing happening with the Philistines, right? Where they take the Ark of the Covenant. It's so funny. It's like such a soap opera. They take the Ark of the Covenant into war with them, and what ends up happening is it gets stolen, because God had not ordained that specific battle, but it gets stolen. They put it in their temple, and they wake up in the morning, their idol in their temple has fallen over. The next day it has fallen over again, and it's like hands and the head have been cut off. So very, very similar to ancient Near Eastern idol worship, where they believe that the image was kind of God. We see something very similar happening with the Ark of the Covenant there. And so one of the things that we do in our study is we compare. So we see some similarities, but first of all, the Ark has absolutely no human or animal-like qualities. It's a box. There is nothing on it that suggests, oh, this is what God would look like. And never does it say that God spoke to the people from the Ark. It's always very specific. He's above the Ark. He's above. So whenever, right, the imagery of God sitting on his throne room. So whenever Moses goes, the voice is not coming from the idol, right, the ark. It's not coming from it. It's coming from above it, because God is not the ark. The ark is not God. God is not the ark. He's not inside. He hasn't taken residence in the ark. He's taken residence above it. So he's just chosen to kind of centralize his being
so
there.
Yeah, one of my favorite places of kind of imagery and visions that we see is actually out of Isaiah 6. And I don't know, did we take Isaiah together? I don't remember if we
I never took Isaiah. I did not take Isaiah. Man. I know.
Okay, so in Isaiah 6, which Isaiah is weird, by the way, just again, generally, folks, for your own education, almost all of the prophets we see start with the call of the prophet. Mm-hmm. Isaiah gets his call in chapter 6, which leads a lot of scholars to think that Isaiah was already functioning as a prophet before he got a specific call for this specific kind of prophecy. With all that said, it says in chapter 6, verse 1, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up. So he's having this vision, and God's not in the temple. His vision is this heavenly one. God is sitting on a throne, high and lifted up. And then it says, and the train of his robe. So I don't know, like how I visualize it is that he's got this really cool, like capey thing, like robe. And then it says the train of his robe filled the temple. Like It's just hilarious because it's like the tip of his robe filling the temple, which would be very much in contrast to how some of these other pagan nations would have seen presence. God's still reigning in this like glorious way, and he's so glorious, you could say, where it's the train of his robe that is filling the temple. And then there's this seraphim that are flying around, and there's these worship sort of statements being made. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And again, also, this is the localized stuff that you were talking about in regards to how God localizes things. Go ahead.
And also with because in the holy place, there's also a table called the table of showbread, right? And there's some bread on there along with an empty goblet. And so, because we were talking about how certain differences, they're similar and then they're different. And in ancient Near Eastern way that they would run their temple was the gods needed to be taken care of. That was kind of what the temple was for. The god lived there and he reigned there, and the role of the people and the priesthood was to make sure that all the needs of the gods were taken care of, so they could go about running their business of running the cosmos and making sure that they had rain and all that stuff. And so, they would put food out in front of the god. They would put drinks, so the god can consume, because they would get hungry, right? They're very much like people. But what you see with the Israelites is, yes, they have a table and there's bread on it, but never once is there anything that says that's for God to eat. God needs to get hungry, right? There's actually even a passage where it says, I'm not a man where I get hungry and I need to eat. So then, okay, so what's happening there with that table? Well, that table, the bread that was there would be changed every Sabbath. And then the old bread would come out, new bread would come in, and then the priests would get to eat from the bread that was there before, on the table before. And so what's actually happening here is a very, very interesting reversal of roles, where it's not the people who are feeding the god, but it's God actually feeding his priests from his own table. There is no anthropomorphic language as far as he consumes that bread, he eats it. There's nothing that says anything like that. So it's very distinct already in that way.
What about like sacrifices? Because there's similar language to sacrifices, as like yes, it's a pleasing aroma to the Lord, or they offer up things to the Lord. But it seems like it's just like consumed and burned, and a large portion of that sacrifice again goes to the priests.
Exactly. So all of the sacrifices happen outside. They're never inside of the structure itself, right, in the holy place. So even the drink offerings that are given to God, they are thrown onto the altar. So it's more like the smell of it, right? The aroma, and we hear that kind of language in scripture. The aroma comes up to God. But again, there's never any wording or language used that he is consuming those things and they are taking care of a need that he has. But in every single ancient Near Eastern temple things that they have, where we can study these oracles and all of the traditions that they have, there's very, very clear language that it's the God who is eating this. So not only is the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, not eating, but then he turns around and takes care of his people, right? The priests. They are eating from his bread, from his table. It's the table that is in the presence of God in the holy place, and they get to eat that bread. They get to eat the meat that gets sacrificed, right? The leftovers. So God doesn't need anything like to take care of him and sustain. Yeah, he doesn't need any of that. And in turn, he is the one who is providing for his people.
I wonder if it's just beyond provision, in the sense of like being invited to be at the table of the Lord. So there's a scene in there's a scene in the Old Testament where the elders of Israel have this like feast dinner thing with God at the foot of the mountain. That's very interesting.
Well, not at the foot. It's a little up the mountain. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's interesting, right? Like it's very interesting that they would have this religious meal together, and then when you compare that to, say, the Lord's Supper or the table, the Eucharist, it's same kind of concept. Jesus speaks about a feast that he will participate in later on. Like so we like thematically go through this, and then you realize kind of the beauty in the interweavings. We call this a meta-narrative, by the way, when we in biblical studies or just literature studies. But there's this interwoven aspect of God continuously inviting people to be with him, you could actually say to dine with him. And if you want to even take this a bit further, you can say when Jesus is speaking to one of the churches in the book of Revelation, he says, I stand at the door and knock. And again, the idea there is that Jesus is dining with his people, except in that case, the people are not doing the stuff they're supposed to be doing actually. And they're celebrating Jesus in a feast, and Jesus is outside knocking on the door, which is like the worst thing that you can possibly think about. So there's the big issue, I think, that comes up in our temple, like this study, is within the New Testament, we are referred to as, like when I say we mean Christians, as the temple of God, right? In what way, I guess,
It's a big question.
Just talk about it. I don't want to just go.
Well, like, here's the thing. We only spend 1 week, right, on the New Testament, like Jesus and kind of the believers and how that works. But that's because we've spent 4 weeks up to this point laying the groundwork. So when we lay the groundwork and then we hear, right, and like that's common knowledge that believers are the temple of God, right? You are the temple of the Holy Spirit. But once you've laid the groundwork and you see what it meant, what the temple meant, then you can truly then get the depth and richness of what it means that believers are the temple. It's not just a matter of, oh, God is with you at all times and he's watching you, or make sure you don't sin because you're the temple of the Holy Spirit, or like that's definitely a part of it. That's not,
Yeah, it
I'm not
includes all
trying to
that.
like, yeah, but there's so much more that's happening when you look at the mission of the temple and how it's God's dwelling place on earth. And then you say, okay, believers are the temple. So if the temple is God's dwelling on earth, believers are the temple, then that we would assume, right? You're the philosopher here, that believers are
Good
God's
deduction here.
dwelling on earth. Yeah,
Yes.
you've taught me well that believers are God's dwelling on earth. Okay, so then what does that mean? What does that imply? There's so much that it implies. And in we, it takes us back to the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve's role in regard to the rest of creation. It takes us back to the Great Commission. And like, so when we start seeing ourselves as the temple, right? I am the dwelling place of God. It's not just, oh, I have access to God whenever I want. You do, and that's such a wonderful, glorious thing. I mean, we can talk to God. We're in his throne room whenever we want, right? But it also has a part where we are to go. We're to take the temple. We're to take his presence wherever we go. We walk into a room, we've just brought God with us. Right? It's not just, oh, I'm just a Christian and God is disconnected. Like, no. And I'm not like, I don't want anyone to misunderstand. We are not God, right? But we are the
Correct.
temple of God. We are the dwelling place of God. When you walk into a room, especially when there's like no other believer there, like you are bringing the Lord with you. And so like studying all of that and then looking at the Garden of Eden and what the Garden of Eden meant and the mission Adam and Eve had, right? The man and the woman, the mission that they had in the beginning. And then we see this reinstatement of that occurring with the temple. And so it just like it really transforms, and it transforms your own worship, your personal relationship with God, communal worship. Like when we gather, we are these, the
Yeah.
temples kind of thing. Um, and then it also really transforms evangelism.
Very good. Somebody said it sounds a bit like a Quaker perspective, God's presence within a person. I would just say the Quakers are biblical on this subject, at least. And yeah, God's presence is
Yes,
with
that is the
people.
biblical.
That's what the Bible teaches. How is this related to the priesthood of all believers?
Okay, so that's actually, it's very related, because when we look at the initial goal for the temple, and for Israel, right? Israel was a priesthood. They were supposed to be a nation of priests. And when you think about the role of a priest, where they are the intermediary, right, between God and man. And so Israel was supposed to be the intermediary between God and the rest of the nations. So then now you go to the believer. As the believers, we are the priesthood. So we are the ones who stand in the gap between God and those who are lost, right? Jesus does the work. Obviously, he's the mediator above all, but we are supposed to replicate him, and we are the ones who take him where we go. We are the ones who bring him into situations, and we stand in the gap now between people. So we are called to be priests in that sense.
Okay. Carl's asking, is this teaching from John Walton? Does John...
So no, this is not a John Walton study at all. I
Yeah.
have there are, like, especially when I go through the ancient Near Eastern parts, that is a lot of Walton's work because it's just comparative. I mean, it's his story, so there's no
Yeah.
theology in that necessarily. John Walton does go back to Genesis a lot, but his is not. Um, he argues for more of a functionary, right? Genesis, the creation of functions as opposed to the creation of material, where
Mm-hmm.
we don't get into any of that in this study.
Yeah. Good. What was I going to say? What else do I want to pick your mind about? Now, okay, so just sort of clarification. Some people, you said when you walk into a room, you take God with you, and some people might sit there. You're going to get a reaction from people generally who don't understand what you're talking about.
Yes.
They're like, "Well, God doesn't need you to take him anywhere, right? Like he's everywhere." Like there's this idea, but it seems like you're saying something different other than like God is omnipresent. Like clearly that's the case.
Clearly,
But
yes.
But we get this like passage, for example, like God dwells the praises of his people, right? Like God makes himself presently known within certain contexts and communities.
Yeah. I mean, even Solomon, when he's building the temple in Chronicles, okay, he says, "Who am I that I will build this building, and how will it contain the God of the universe?" Right? So there's, even throughout scripture, there is this understanding of God is omnipresent, he's uncontainable. And yet, and kind of like that's the beauty of it, is that yet he still chooses to make himself known and localize himself in certain areas and certain contexts. And then you get to the New Testament with certain people. While, yes, God has always been omnipresent, yet his glory was present in the temple in a very localized and specific way. Not that he wasn't there, somewhere else, or he wasn't in other nations, but he was centralized with his people at his temple. And so that's the same kind of concept, is that he chooses to localize and centralize himself within the believers. That is how now he is choosing to dwell. Where in the Old Testament it was with a tabernacle and then an actual building structure of a temple. In the New Testament, it's completely revolutionized, and people are those temples. And not that, again, God is not everywhere. God does not need me, and thank God for that. But yet he chooses, right? He chooses to use his people. He chooses to dwell with his people. You said it in the beginning. In Revelation, he says, God's place is with man. God's dwelling is with man. And is he saying that he needs man? No, he's not saying he needs man. It's saying that that's where he wants to be. His place is with man, man's place is with him. And it's very interesting, the wording. He doesn't say man's place is with me. He says God's place is with man.
Yeah.
And it's a slight change, but it's, again, speaking volumes in the fact that his desire is to dwell with his people.
Yeah, Apostle reflects as God makes himself known. Does that contradict belief via faith? No, it doesn't. I mean, Paul seems pretty confident in this. In the book of Romans, he talks about both of these things, that God has made himself known in creation as well as in the person of Christ. And then belief in, I don't know how you're defining faith, but faith is not an unreasonable sort of thing, or it's not something that you know or understand. It's not this weird mystical sort of thing. Faith is trust. And you got to trust the stuff you know. I mean, that's the way I would break it down. So, no, so guys, the e-course that there's a conversation, the e-course that we're offering is for everyone. It's not just women only. for those who are asking.
For those who are, a woman will be teaching it, so that's,
Correct.
your call.
Well, deal with it. Whoever, if you're uncomfortable with it, then don't take the course.
Mhm.
So Emil says, thoughts on seed, land, and blessing in the New Testament and where a Jew finds himself in the Genesis 12 promise. Dude, that was a loaded
Oh
question.
man, yeah. That's also very covenant. That's more
Well,
covenant.
that's what there was a response there. Laura said she also has a series on covenants too.
I do. I do. So I need to develop that a little bit more because that's meant to be a standalone. While this one, like it's a companion guide. You can't go through it by yourself without like the
Without,
lectures.
yeah.
Yeah, but the covenants it's a work in progress, but it is a standalone, and so that would be available for anybody to do kind of at their own pace whenever they want on their own, or even with like a group.
Maybe we can work on that and then make that like a downloadable PDF for a certain
Hmm.
fee. So me and Ani will talk about the covenants one when it
Yeah.
gets fully
But that
finished.
question is definitely covenant related.
Yeah, okay. So we can touch upon it. That's okay. Look, guys, if you are interested in this, let me just put in this plug. If you are interested in it, there's a registration form in the description box. Hit that link. It'll take you to a registration form. And then just put in all your info in there. And then I will contact you personally and then let you know what the details are. We're kind of slowly rolling this out. I wanted to introduce you guys to Ani. And then we'll create some shorts, some more ad stuff, and then flyers, pricing, all that stuff is to come. But if you are interested in it, please go to that link, go to the form. It's a Google Docs form, fill it out, and then that way I know who I'm interacting with and what the interests are from people. Okay, so let's touch upon that, okay? Thoughts on the seed, land, and blessings in the New Testament before we jump into I guess it's connected, yeah.
Um, I think just a short answer is that the New Testament redefines who is a seed of Abraham. I mean, definitely, at least in Galatians, we see that happening in other places. But there's a redefinition of who is considered a seed of Abraham and who is considered to be a child, right? And then only the children then become recipients of the blessings and the promise that is found in Genesis 12. Uh, so where Israel lands, well, that depends on the New Testament definition of who Israel is. When you get to obviously Romans 11, there's a little bit of there's a little bit of thing that happens there with like Israel by blood, right? Those who are Jews. But overall, we just see something that is more like a redefinition of Israel. That would kind of be just a short, quick
Yeah.
answer because that's very loaded.
There you go. Carl, is this a daily course? It is not a daily course. This will take 6 weeks. It's a 6-week course. It will be weekly live. We will announce the date and all that stuff and timing. But also, if people can't make it to the live classes, we will upload and have the classes, the lectures available for them to watch at their own convenience. So it's sort of like a hybrid. You can get the live version if you're available and able to do that, and if not, you can get that in a recorded form and have access to that. Good question. Hey, what's up, Justin? How you doing? Okay. Is there anything else we want to mention? I promised you 30 minutes, but we're coming up on 50 minutes here,
50.
Ani. I think
You
we
get me
can.
started on this stuff. I can't stop.
I think we can keep talking about it. So I don't know if this would relate to this, but I'm going to ask it anyways, and then you tell me if it does. If it doesn't, then we'll just move on. So one of the unique things we see about ancient kind of temples, structure-wise, is this Ugaritic kind of formats, right? They're more like pyramids or these step pyramids. People might be aware of so people might be familiar with, say, the pyramids, the Great Pyramids in Egypt, or maybe even like the South American, Central American pyramids. Mm-hmm. But is the temple like that, or is it not?
In ours, like the biblical temple?
Yeah, so like we get those structures, but it seems like the biblical structure is not a pyramid.
No, it's not at all. You'll see gradation in holiness even in ancient pyramids, not just pyramids, but ancient temples. So what you're talking about, those are called ziggurats, and there were considered a stairway, not for people to go up to heaven, but for the deity to come down. And the temple would usually be right at the top, and there would be a bed, and of course food and all that stuff. That's for the deity to come down, rest, have his food. And so you will see even like a gradation in holiness that only certain people can go up to certain parts. But our structure, like the biblical structure, is not at all like a pyramid like. It's flat, and the only, I would say, similarity in that way is that the holiness, like, right, we get from outside where um, your layperson can go. When you tabernacle and Solomon's temple, it was only the men, Israelite men, could go into the outer courts. And when you get to Herod's temple, he has a specific place for Gentiles, and he has a specific place for Israelite women, and then for Israelite men. And then you get to just like the priestly quarters in the holy place. But so you have that, but you don't have any kind of
But it's still on a
pyramid-like
mountain.
structure.
It's still on a high place.
It
It's on a
is, but
yeah.
yes, but the temple itself is on a high place because when you get into cosmic geography of the ancient Near East, mountains were extremely, extremely important. That is something that we get into in this study, where gardens and mountains are kind of seen as the dwelling place of the gods in the ancient Near East. Gardens, because right, they were lush and full of vegetation, and in a place where it was really pretty much dry land, they're like, of course the gods are going to be in this luscious place where there's no like there's always going to be food there. And then mountains, because it was considered a high place. People didn't hike back then, so it was like an out of reach place that, of course the gods are going to dwell in this high dwelling place. And so you see a lot of mountain garden language, and then you bring that into the Bible and you kind of see that, okay, scripture is doing something very similar because remember, it's written in a context to a very specific group of people who had a world view. And God, through his grace, it's a very gracious act, he speaks to us in our worldviews. And so when you notice certain things happening on in gardens, or you notice certain things happening on mountains, there's a message that's being portrayed there. And usually you see this very similar language to the temple. Like you look at Sinai, Sinai is seen as a temple because of not only is it on a mountain, but we have the glory cloud at the top. We have a three-part gradation again, just like we have with the tabernacle and temple. We see that with the Garden of Eden. You see it whenever with Noah, even on the mountain. You see it with Jacob when he wrestles with God. So you see very, very significant things occurring in gardens and on mountains. The temple itself is on a mountain, on Mount Zion, right? But the temple is not that kind of a structure. It doesn't have that same structure as that you would have.
Okay. So a couple of questions, one of them more of a practical sort. If I'm unable to attend the courses, are you willing to answer some questions I may have? Yes, you guys will have email access to Ani to ask questions, and then she will get back to you guys and respond to you. And then I'm going to protect her from just like
For myself.
from herself. So I will have kind of what she can and she can't do. That's because she has a family and she has a husband and she has children. She has so I don't want her to like FaceTime every single student and give them an hour of her time. It's then it's not going to be very healthy. But yeah, you guys will have access to the teacher of the course, to the instructor, and she will get back to you in a timely fashion. So especially for those people that can't be there live, you guys will have access to her. What is cosmic geography? Can you explain our current understanding of cosmic geography?
Yes. Oh, I love that question. Okay. So our cosmic geography, right? We are in a solar system and we have a sun. There's 8 planets that orbit the sun. We are in the Milky Way galaxy, and there's millions of other galaxies, right? This is our understanding of cosmic geography. The ancient Near Eastern one was extremely different. I mean, in every way, it probably was different. And their understanding was, I mean, for the flat earthers out there, you know, it wouldn't be that different because they definitely understood it to be a flat earth. They actually saw it almost as this like three disc thing where it's like the heavens and then it's the earth that we live in and then the Sheol, right? The underground. And there is water that's pretty much all around. So above and water's below. And this should sound familiar for people who have read the Old Testament because they this is their presupposition. So whenever they're speaking of how the earth functions, this is how they see it. And then they also believe that there's this firmament, right, that's holding up the waters. It's holding the waters above from pouring in. And I mean, and that kind of makes sense. If you're an ancient person who doesn't have access to the science and technology that we have, if water is coming down, right, when it rains, their assumption is, well, there must be water there.
Mm-hmm.
Water must be there in order for it to come down. And so it was through their natural observations that they formed this understanding of what cosmic geography was like. And in the center, usually in the center, was a mountain. And on the mountain was a tree. A lot of times referred to as the world's tree. In some contexts, it's referred to as the tree of life. And in the center was where the deity dwelt, and that's where the deity's temple was. That's kind of how the ancients would have seen that. And so when you understand that that's kind of the Israelites' worldview and framework, then you start to see parallels. Okay, garden, mountain, this tree. So something is significant is happening with the garden in Genesis. Now we're not saying that there wasn't a literal garden there, you know. We can rest at ease and read it literally, but it's God is just such a masterful artist and work, like the way he thinks. It's he, you know, he accomplishes so many things with one thing. And so there's something happening in the garden, a message that's being portrayed as far as God's presence, his dwelling, and then you bring humanity into it. And so, which is very, very different again from ancient Near Eastern context. The humans had no role within the temple rule, I mean, aside from the priesthood. And they were actually just created as kind of like, oh, we need someone to take care of us. But with the biblical story, right, we see that the creation of humanity was intentional. It's actually the pinnacle of creation, and they have a place within the garden realm and dwelling place of God, and they have a very important role even beyond that. So even seeing the difference there, but again, understanding cosmic geography helps us to see these things that are happening biblically.
So I'm going to put that on the screen, by the way, in regards to. So that's what Ani's talking about.
I can't see.
Yeah, you can't see it, but it's essentially the firmament, waters apart, the earth, and whoa.
Yeah, and I have one in the PowerPoint too. So if it's not the same one, but
yeah. So you get heavens. So again, they here's a very interesting when we talk about even like our views of life and all that stuff. Like we see ourselves, generally speaking, as, and I'm talking worldview wise here, or I'm talking like kind of generalized societal kind of views rather than my individual Christian view or something like that. So what's so important about the earth? Well, nothing much. We're in this random corner of the universe.
We're a speck.
Completely unimportant, right? Like that's very different than, say, certain parts of history when people thought we were the center of the universe. Or so that would be a part of people's cosmic geography and how they're important and what that looks like, and what the deities are doing in the midst of this and how they interact with creation and all that.
Another point between the God of the Bible and the ancient Near Eastern is that every single element in their cosmic geography, right, the sun, the firmament, all of that, it was a deity itself.
The sun is a deity. The firmament that's separating the waters is a deity. I mean, I have another picture in the PowerPoint that shows an ancient Egyptian drawing and how each one is like they portrayed as their god. So you see kind of the image that Arthur probably put up that of the three layer discs that they had, but each one is a god. And what we see happening in Genesis 1 is that no, like God is transcendent in all of the things of creation. He controlled it. He's the one who created it, but he is not it. And there is no other it that needs to be because he controls all of it.
So again, I just got some pictures running there in regards to what the temple looks like and comparisons between Solomon's temple versus Herod's Temple. But again, we were talking earlier about the Holy of Holies, and this is what you're getting in regards to what he added, Solomon added. But that would be what the general structure of it looks like. And I got another question. Maybe we can call it a day for you to go. I'll still stick around another like 30 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes, because I have somewhere to be at for.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Siri doesn't understand what we're talking about. Well, that's probably a good thing. What is your opinion when people say when the third temple in Israel is being built, that's a sign of the second coming of Christ?
We talk about this in the Bible study.
Okay.
So that's it. That's all. Without really giving much away, we look at kind of where this idea of this third actual temple comes from, and that comes from Ezekiel. Ezekiel has a vision that's 9 chapters long. It's very detailed about this temple that he sees. And that's why I was going to ask when you said you're putting up pictures of comparisons between Solomon's and Herod's. I was like, find one where there's Ezekiel's.
There actually is. There's one with Ezekiel's temple.
So it's this massive structure, and there's great detail in kind of what it looks like. And so what we do in the study is we look at, is this a literal temple? And obviously there's lots of great people who hold to different views. And so we do our best to kind of look at some of the arguments for a literal temple and some of the arguments against. And then we can go from there and talk about, well, is it a literal?
Or is it not? Yeah. Cool. Okay, so we this is the introduction to kind of people to meet you. This is Ani. She's a very good friend. She's a Bible college grad. She is really, really good at the subject, guys. She is a nerd, or is it a geek? I don't know which one. I always get called out on this. You're a nerd. So are we all. And I've seen her throughout Bible college. I know I've seen the assignments. Let me put it this way. I've written papers. I've written papers. That would be correct. I've written papers that Ani has corrected. So for anybody who wants to know kind of how this works, and her English is fantabulous. And she's very, very good when it comes to her hermeneutics and exegesis. She's naturally loves that stuff. And then on top of that, she's one of those very rare and awkward people who loves the Old Testament a lot. Now, again, I say that in joking, but that's also the reality. A lot of Christians focus so much on the New Testament where they forget there is an Old Testament. And if you're a really good student of the New Testament, there's no way that you could be a bad student of the Old Testament, because that's the backdrop. And I don't want to just say this like historical stuff, like there's so much in the Old Testament that's going to enhance your faith, your relationship with God, so much stuff you're going to know and find out about God. So it's extremely important that we just educate ourselves on these matters. She's a very good communicator, as you guys have seen. She's very excited about what she researches, and when she researches, right? Like there's books everywhere. She's in it. And so we're gonna offer this. Okay, what is fantabulous? It's a word that I can use. You got a problem with it? Deal with it. Deal with it. Where's my deal with it thing? Man, thug life. Deal with it. Here we go. Boom. Glasses. Deal with it, bro. I need the Doug Laugh music. So we're offering this e-course. Again, if you're interested in it, the link is in the description box. Hit it, go to the registration form. Just fill out your info. There's a couple of questions there, and then I will contact you guys, and then we will set this up. You can take it live, or you can get the recorded version. Yes, you will have access. Some of these questions were really good. You will have access to Ani to answer for the questions on these matters. And you're also going to get a PDF, downloadable PDF that you can, it's a companion to the study. So you can download that and then work through it. You can print it on your own and then handwrite it or do it on your computer, however you want to do that. But I'm very excited about this. And I think there are people in the general Apologia Center community that would also be excited about this. Now, how does this, finally, before you go, and maybe this is just coming out of nowhere because you're more like theologically minded and exegetically minded. In what ways do you think this could help people when it comes to apologetics?
Oh, apologetics. Good question. Well, apologetics one side for a minute, but it definitely helps in evangelism. Okay, because when again, you keep in mind the things we were talking about what it means to be the temple, it makes you more, like, it changes your mentality to be more evangelistic in how you live and how you act. And so I know some of the things that, like, some of the conversations that we had when we were going through this, there was like conviction there where I'm the temple and I've taken that for granted, and what my role, what that requires, right? And not, again, to shame or anything, but just a self-reflection, and the Holy Spirit really was working. And so as far as apologetics, I mean, what's evangelism without apologetics? So I don't know. I can't.
Correct. No, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so I would say yes, your evangelism will be encouraged and strengthened. The other thing I would say is that you're going to get a very, very good understanding of how the backdrop, historical backdrop to Israelite culture, what law was, how they did these things, what the central worship looks like of that sort. Because a lot of questions we get asked in doing apologetics is actually about those sorts of things. I get a lot more questions about that than just like philosophical considerations. And you have to know that in order for you to be able to answer people properly on the questions they have. So these studies are extremely important to your apologetic. If we're viewing apologetics beyond, which we should, beyond just giving, I don't know, philosophical arguments for God's existence. That is just a small part of doing apologetics. So, Ani, I want to thank you for taking this, what was originally promised to be 30 minutes, but an hour and 8 minutes to be with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Arthur.
Okay.
I'll talk
to you later. Bye-bye. Okay, folks. I hope that you enjoyed that. Again, I'm going to stick around for another 20 minutes or so, because I got to be somewhere at 4. Hey, you're more than welcome, Paul. More than welcome. My pleasure. If you guys have any questions, throw it my way. We can just kind of hang out for the next 20 minutes, answer some of your questions, and then go from there. But again, the e-course will be live over the next couple of weeks. But so you're going to hear a lot more about this. Okay. Some more advertisement stuff. We'll probably create shorts. We'll probably put out some videos of Ani explaining this stuff, and then we'll get all the pricing and all that stuff. But this is an e-course that's going to be offered. This e-course is going to be live, and if you can't make it live, it's going to be recorded, and you will have access to that. Okay. Did you lose a bet? Why did you shave? Yes, I've lost a bet. That's why I've shaved. That's exactly what's happened. What is the most compelling argument against God to you personally? I've said this before. I think the best argument that I've seen against the existence of God would be a form of the problem of evil. Now, there are very simple forms of the problem of evil and more complicated forms of the problem of evil, but I would say it would be a form of the problem of evil. Is her course ready? If so, link it. Okay, guys, again, the course is going to be live. So no, unless she teaches it live, so we can't link anything. When she starts teaching it, then we will link it. But the registration to the course is in the description box. So go to the description box. There's a link there. If you're interested in it, if you want more information about it, because we haven't said anything about pricing, and we would like to, we will communicate that in the correct time. If you're interested in it, please make sure that you put it in there, and then we'll get back to you on that. So, but it's not done just yet, because we got to pick a date where she's teaching and all that stuff and the time. Which form of the problem of evil? I'm guessing natural disasters, children with cancer and such. Not really. I mean, probably the best form of this argument I've read is from William Rowe. And what he says is, basically, if God were to exist, this would be the best possible world. And then he argues what a best possible world would look like, given the attributes of God. I'm oversimplifying it here, but he goes on to say that this isn't the best of all possible worlds, because here's what we should expect, or we would expect. And so he concludes that God doesn't exist. This one atheist stood me, told me, I'm guessing, he knew everything about Christianity, so I asked about apologetics. He's like, Christians have a lot to apologize about. Oh, man.
This is a sickness of the highest order.
Oh, man. It's hilarious. Yeah, maybe we do. Maybe we do. What is the most compelling argument for Jesus? For what Jesus? For the historical existence of Jesus? I think we would take it as any historical personal study, and any study on any historical person. And the data we have is just unmatched that there was a person named Jesus. If Jesus is who he said he was and all that stuff, I would say the resurrection. Gary Habermas's minimum facts argument, I think, are pretty good. And the way you can establish that work for me, I'm convinced by it. Let's put it that way. Yeah, so the minimal facts argument by Gary Habermas, it's a good one. Who are your top 5 apologists, favorite apologists of all time, dead or alive? I've probably mentioned this somewhere, but I don't know if I would just like have the same list. I don't know. Aquinas is pretty good. There's no way we can talk about this without mentioning Bill Craig. Depends how I want to put apologists, man. I think C.S. Lewis is good. I got to be selfish and put J.P. Moreland in there because he was my professor and I've had him on the podcast. First guest, by the way. Bam, bam, bam. First guest on the podcast was Dr. J.P. Moreland, and I hope to have him back on soon. Justin Martyr. I mean, we could go. The thing is that sometimes people aren't classified as apologists, but I think they are because of the way they're communicating worldviews. So like the Cappadocian Fathers, I really enjoy, I think are good. So yeah, I'll stop there. Justin Martyr is one of the earliest Christian apologists. So look him up. Okay, Mike Ross. Do you think that God's existence ought to be proven before we argue with atheists about the historical resurrection evidence? Not necessarily. Because, Mike, I think you can argue backwards. So you can speak about the resurrection, and if the resurrection happened, then by default, it is the case that God exists. Right? Because Jesus was who he said he was, and so on and so forth, right? So on and so forth. So you can argue both ways. It depends who you're talking to and about. Emil is asking to get blocked. Alvin Planagott. Alvin Planagott's a philosopher. I wouldn't say he's an apologist per se. He wouldn't. So yeah, I would leave philosophers out of there, like Swinburne. Like it's just I wouldn't want those guys in there because they're not. What are a few of your favorite YouTube channels? Oh man. Go to my YouTube channel and then check out the channels I have in there. But I got close friends that I enjoy watching. And then, so it changes, man. It changes depending on what I'm looking for. I can't really say. Have you seen Michael Heiser's Unseen Realm? And what are your thoughts on it? I have not seen Unseen Realm. I have the book. I still haven't read it, but knowing the stuff that I know about Mike Heiser and the podcasts, countless hours of podcasts I've listened to from Michael Heiser, I would say even if I don't agree with it entirely, I would love it. Have you ever read about Baal? He was a Byzantine Empire and Baal? Emperor and Armenian. Great story. I don't think I have read about this individual, but there have been a number of Armenians who were Byzantine emperors. Yeah. Oh, you mean Basil? Yeah, so I haven't read. None of those make, or I've probably heard it in passing, but. Hey man, stop. Emil's going crazy. He's in Marcion and shame. Who is your favorite and least favorite atheist? My favorite atheist passed away now, Christopher Hitchens. I think Christopher Hitchens was brilliant. I think Chris Hitchens was very articulate. I loved listening to him. Even if I would get annoyed with him sometimes, I kind of had a love and hate relationship listening to Chris Hitchens. I just love the way the man communicated. So I really enjoyed it. I think his book, God is Not Great, is probably one of the worst books I've ever read. Nonetheless, really enjoyed Chris Hitchens. Least favorite apologist. Least favorite atheist. Probably Aaron Ra. It would be a toss-up between Aaron Ra and Dillahunty. But that has nothing to do with what they say and everything to do with their personalities. At least from what I've seen. I've never met them personally. You guys are funny. What's up, Keanu? How you doing, man? Okay, so I'm going to head out, guys. Again, if you're interested in the e-course, go to the description box, hit the link that takes you to a Google sign-up form, and then sign up on it, and it will get you more information. This Temple Study e-course is going to be 6 weeks. Ani's going to be teaching it, and I think is going to be really, really awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me. And Ani was not here anymore for the last hour and 21 minutes. Sorry I can't hang out too much today because I got to be somewhere at 4. You guys have a nice day. I will see you guys tomorrow, 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, where we will do some reactions. Take care. God bless, and I will see you tomorrow.